So there was changes to the welfare state, cutbacks in certain areas, and the reason for this was the government saw that the previous government, which had been this more kind of collectivist idea of providing, supported a dependency culture. So what that means is that people were too reliant on the government's help, and Thatcher and the rest of the Tories, or the majority of them, felt that if you let people get on with their own problems, then they would kind of sort themselves out and be able to work their way out of problems. But if the government was constantly helping them, they wouldn't be able to do this. Okay, so that's quite a controversial idea there. Now, another big area that we need to look at in the New Right is the fact that there's a lot of privatization of national industries. Okay, and this is where lots of the controversies come from. Now, Thatcher had lots of run-ins with the trade unions. She made it more difficult for trade unions to operate. As I said, this is 5-minute sociology, so we don't have time to go into this. Maybe I'll make a separate video at some point on this. But so she privatized national industries. There was closing down of mines, steelworks. And then after the Thatcher period in 1991, we see John Major further privatising national industries such as, or national businesses such as British Rail. So that continued. A few other things that happened. Thatcher allowed people to buy their own council houses. So if you remember in the collectivist era that we were looking at, there was a lot more council houses and council maintained properties built. And Thatcher allowed people to buy these up so they could then become homeowners. Now, the issue with this was a lot of these weren't replaced. So actually, there was then a shortage of housing. We can't talk about the New Right without thinking of education. So we've mentioned some education sort of policies and acts in previous theories, but with this, in the New Right era, we get the 1980 Education Act. Now, this is a really famous and contentious point that's always quoted when anyone talks about Thatcher and the New Right. If you remember, I said that in the Beveridge Report and the collectivist era, children were allowed free milk at school. Now, Thatcher famously took away the free milk from school children, and this is often something she's remembered for. Now, it was except for those children from families receiving supplementary benefits or family income support, but the majority of children had their free milk stopped. Interestingly, there were some changes in the 1980 Education Act to the governing bodies. So school governing bodies had to include 2 parents. And then parents had the right to choose and the right to appeal if they didn't get the school they wanted, okay, which didn't help. It kind of caused further class divide, basically, because parents could start picking and choosing catchment areas and where their children went. Okay, well, just to summarise then, we can see Thatcherism and the New Right as the opposite to the collectivist ideology, where there is very minimal state involvement in everyday lives. It's thought that people should get on with their own problems and they should support themselves in order to get out of poverty, or to get back to work, that kind of thing. So if we quickly think of some positives and negatives, we did see a boost in the economy on paper. However, there was massive loss of jobs. There was whole villages destroyed economically because mines being closed down. So families lost everything, and a lot of this damage is still visible today. So there we go. That's Thatcher and the New Right. I hope that's helpful. It's quite hard to get a lot of this in such a short period of time, but I may make future videos on these anyway.